This is the Free Zone Communique, transmitting from Virginia's unoccupied sector. If you think smart cities, DEI, censorship, government intrusion, bug paste, and other left-wing nonsense are no longer a possibility, think again. We've won one election with slim majorities. Our work to rebuild a free and sane America has just begun.
I said in a recent post, Congress's job is all of the oversight. They make the laws and then they watch. And the oversight isn't a little bit, it isn't sometimes. It's their friggin' job. It's what you do. You have one friggin' job. And the departments have gotten so full of themselves that they think their job is to give Congress just enough information so they can have a nice little hearing and get some good face time on TV.
It's worse than that. It's worse than that. The intelligence agency teaches certain members of the intelligence community how to manipulate the members of Congress and their staffs, how to manipulate to get what they want, as opposed to what you're saying, which is the direction of the people elected by the electorate. And they do that by intimidating members, by threatening. They'll leak information out. You know, it's illegal for me as an elected official to give classified information out to a reporter. The agency does that all the time. They'll bring in selective reporters and they'll feed them information, and then the reporter will write something from anonymous sources. Now, those anonymous sources work for the agency.
Right.
So the agency is deliberately spinning a story. Then they'll come to me and ask me to respond to an anonymous source, which I know it's coming from the agency. So they control the agenda. They control the spin. And then when people come out with the truth, they call them conspiracy theorists.
Right.
And they have it down to a science.
I'm interested to see with the new crew we have in there now, Tulsi Gabbard, it seems like a very serious person, but we don't know what she's capable of yet in this community. If she is the person she's always been and doesn't let the sycophants seduce her, this intelligence community may be in for a rude awakening. I hope it is.
They're already wide awake, and they already know they got problems. When Trump announced that the 51 liars were having their security clearances removed because they lied about Russia manipulation of the election,
right?
That sent a signal. No longer can they use information now because they're not protected. And when Trump made that move, and here's the problem I have, and I predicted this on a TV show last May. I said, they're going to go out to kill Trump. And a month or so later, they had the attack in Pennsylvania and the second one. He's still at risk because what people don't understand, he's taking on a fundamental cancer that has eaten its way into our system. And there are a lot of people that have a tremendous amount to lose as they pursue what they're doing, not just in the intelligence agencies, but in other agencies.
Right.
And so what he's doing, and I've never met Trump, so I'm not somebody out there campaigning. I've never met the man. But what he's doing is what no one else could do. You see, Trump's not dependent on the money earned from the presidency. He's not even taking a salary. You look at all the other presidents. When Clinton went with the presidency, he didn't have any money. He left a multimillionaire, hundreds of millions. Bush Jr., the same thing. Obama was nothing. I was in the House when he was in the Senate. He didn't do anything in there. But he could talk the talk and he could shoot the hoop.
Yes.
So they used him.
He didn't accomplish anything.
I grew up next to Biden from Claymont, Delaware. They're all millionaires. And you're not allowed to make money when you're in Congress. When I was in Congress, the law is if you make over a certain amount, you have to go get approval from the committee. And you can only make, like, I think it was $10,000 more a year, like in writing a book or in giving a speech.
Right.
Well, if that's the law, then how does someone stay in Congress like Chuck Schumer and all of a sudden be worth $180 million or $150 million, whatever he's worth, or Nancy
Unbelievable.
Pelosi. How do they become so wealthy?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling that you have 535 people and you can keep a lid on the shenanigans. Normally, with that many people, somebody's jabbing their face off.
No,
But
because
somehow
they know
this
they know the
state-
price. Well, look what happened to me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Did you get any hassles over the book deals the way Newt did?
No, see, I didn't have book deals. I self-published my fire book. I paid for it myself.
Oh, okay.
And the profits went to firefighters. The Countdown to Terror book, I got approval from the House to publish the book, but it wasn't the book deal. I didn't make any money off the book deal. It was co-authored with my guy that worked for the CIA. It was the content of my book that I took on the CIA. That was in 2005. So 2006, I'm running for my 11th term. I would have become the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee.
Can't have that.
Which meant I would have had unlimited subpoena power.
Right.
Which meant they couldn't control me, either party. So what did they do? 3 weeks before my election, 3 weeks, Mueller in Washington, through a lawyer in Washington that had cut a plea bargain for Sandy Berger, who stole the documents out of the archives under Clinton.
Yeah.
Sent agents to my daughter's house in Philadelphia at 7 o'clock in the morning with the cameras already there, raided her house. It was a national story all over the country. I didn't know whether she had done something wrong. I figured, no, she's not that. No one ever talked to my daughter, ever. No one. No one ever talked to her.
Not even
No
question
one.
her. They didn't even sit her down and question her about
No one ever talked to her.
it. And they go to her house.
They went to her house 7 in the morning, raided her house with the cameras showing them carrying boxes out 3 weeks before my election, and no one ever talked to her. It gets worse.
And they were trying to link
were
her
trying
back
to
to Berger somehow?
No, they were trying to upend my election. You know, I was going to win. I would have won the election and been chairman.
Yeah.
The same day they did that, they raided an attorney from Delaware County who lived in Broomall, still lives in Broomall. Good friend, but he's a Democrat.
Yeah.
And he was a specialist in doing immigration work because he represented a lot of the taxi cab drivers in Philly who were from Ukraine and Russia, from Northeast Philly.
Right.
So he's a friend. I helped him on a couple of situations, one of which I'll describe to you. So the same morning they raided my daughter's house, they raided John Gallagher's law office in Philadelphia, downtown Philly. They shut down Market Street. Shut it down. They never bothered to check. They were in such a rush. At the time of the raid, John Gallagher was working for FBI counterintelligence against Russia that I had arranged 2 years earlier. So you had two sets of agents in his office at the same time. One saying, hey, Mr. Gallagher, you're doing work for the government. We don't know what this is about, but don't answer any questions. You're working for the government.
Right.
The other agent sent by DC, by Mueller and his lawyer friends, they were just sent there. I mean, they're being given a job. So John said, I have nothing to hide. What do you people want? So their first question, by the way, this is all on a taped interview. I have a 3-hour interview with John in my oral history. I've never released it yet.
Yeah.
It's all documented. So nobody can say it didn't happen. I have the documentation. So the first question was, Mr. Gallagher, isn't it true that you're related to Congressman Kurt Weldon? And John started laughing at them. He said, you're from the FBI. And your first question to me, while I'm sitting with counterintelligence agents here, is, am I related to Congressman Weldon because his wife's maiden name is Gallagher? Well, there are millions of Gallaghers in America, but I know who told them that. The person that told them that was rewarded with a job afterwards because that person thought that Gallagher was my relative. It was my cousin Hank Gallagher, who's a lawyer in Wilmington, Delaware, who had helped my daughter with a company she formed. And then, so they knew they were set up. They knew that they were set from Washington without proper information. So John got an apology from the Washington lawyer. And then the file they wanted, and I'm going to tell you the story because it's the kind of story you need to hear. So John said, well, what are you here for? You obviously don't, you're asking about Congressman Weldon. There's no relative of mine. What do you want? They wanted 2 files. One was a file about some liquor deal over in Moldova that he was a lawyer for, which I had nothing to do with. But the second file, one of the families in Philadelphia went to John because their grandson, 20-year-old, was living in Vladivostok, Russia in the Far East and was broadsided by a car driven by a drunken senior State Department official named Douglas Kent. The senior State Department official was stone drunk, rammed his car into this kid, caused the kid to become a quadriplegic. The family in Philly asked John to take the case pro bono, and John did. No money. He worked with the Bar Association. He brought the kid over to America. I met with the kid. We went to Elwyn Institutes to see if Elwyn would give him rehabilitation.
Yeah.
I embarrassed the State Department. The State Department had a hearing in Washington to criticize Putin for human rights violations, which I agree with. So I asked the question to them, well, what about this young kid, Alexander Kashin? What about his rights? Are we going to help this kid out? They didn't want to. They said, Congressman, we can't talk about that in this hearing. I said, why can't you talk about that? Well, we can't talk about that in this hearing. They never acknowledged responsibility for that drunken State Department employee for broadsiding this kid and making him a quadriplegic. You know why? The drunken State Department employee was our senior CIA operative in the Russian Far East. And when he was hired by the agency, John has a picture of him wearing in a Nazi uniform. He was vice chairman of the American Nazi Party. You can't make this stuff up. When he was hired by our CIA, he was vice chairman of the American Nazi Party, and John has a picture of him in the file in uniform.
So
that's what the CIA didn't want. That's what they wanted from John.
Let me ask you this. They set up this big routine of carrying boxes out of your daughter's home. 3 weeks later, you got the big scandal. The election.
I lose the election.
Yeah. Did what was in the boxes?
They gave the boxes back to her unopened. They gave the boxes back to her unopened. They gave the boxes back to her unopened.
Unopened. That's precisely what we watched in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, same thing.
We watched with Stone.
It's worse than that. So they never talked to my daughter, never questioned her, never brought her in, never questioned me, nothing. But and I'll give you this to put on your show. 3 months after they raided my daughter's house, and I lose the election, there's the annual big fire dinner in Washington that I started with 2,000 attendees. And so I'm now going to that dinner for the first time, not as a member of Congress. So George H.W. Bush, the father, the former head of the CIA, does a tribute to me. I want you to play that tribute on your podcast.
As President of the United States, I naturally assumed that the audience was there to hear me speak. But the following year, you packed the ballroom again, as you've done year after year. Why? Not so much to hear from presidents or vice presidents, but to hear from your leader of the past 20 years, Curt Weldon. You often heard Curt speak of the fire service as the sleeping giant. When I was president, if it appeared that I wasn't giving proper attention to your issues, I could always be assured of a phone call from Curt. I'm sure the other presidents would all say the same. To his credit, the fire service was never a partisan issue. It was a personal issue, based on his own experience as a volunteer firefighter. He's the reason why both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue have heard the fire service's voice and answered so many of your calls.
It's 3 minutes long. You know what he says? He says, Congressman Weldon, you are the kind of leader that this country needs, who did his job and left the country stronger and better because of your service.
Is that on YouTube?
Yeah, absolutely, it's on YouTube.
Well,
absolutely, it's on YouTube. They tried to take it down. They tried to take it down 5 years ago, and I flooded the internet with it. It's all over the place. They can't take it down now.
Yeah, you can't pull anything off the internet.
It's the George Bush tribute to me. That was George Bush, the president, the former head of the CIA, saying that publicly to members of Congress in Washington. 3 months after they raided my daughter's house because they got me out. That's what's wrong with the country.
Unbelievable. And it continues today. It's more frequent today. It's more naked today. I mean, back then I can see the con working.
Well, people wouldn't, members wouldn't take it on because they know what you're fighting. And what's the reward? What's the reward? I mean, you know, for I mean, they trashed me. They trashed me. They can say anything they want about you. And how do you defend yourself? When you have the CIA putting all of its resources to trash you, they can say anything they want. How do you defend yourself against that?
Right.
You can't. But did they ever file anything against me or my daughter? Never. Nothing. Zero.
I said that to Dennis. For full disclosure, my cousin Dennis is friends with Kurt, and he had the idea that the two of us should get together for this program. And I said to him, they went through all this. They went through all the theater. And at the time, I didn't know for sure, but I said at the time, as soon as they accomplished their mission, they got Kurt out. Poof. Everything goes away. It just goes away like it never happened. Poof.
Well, it's even some nuances I've never talked about. When I lost my election, you know who I got calls from in my home?
Who's that?
I got a call from Joe Biden, Senator Joe Biden.
Really?
Yeah, he said, Kurt, I'm really sorry, because I worked with him a lot.
Yeah.
He said, claim him. He said, I'm really sorry about your loss. He said, we know what they did to you. That's what he said. We know what they did to you.
Oh,
I got a call from Steny Hoyer. Steny Hoyer, top Democrat in the House. Kurt, it's really outrageous. I mean, people in both parties, you know, they understand. It's like Schumer says. Schumer is a scumbag, and I want this repeated all over the country. He's a scumbag.
He is. He's a caricature of himself.
Schumer made a comment on MSNBC when he was interviewed back in 2017, and the interviewer was asking him why Trump would challenge the CIA. And this is what Schumer said. Well, you got to watch that agency. They can get you any 6 ways to Sunday. They can get you.
I remember
that.
The
leader of our Senate, who was saying that the Senate's not more powerful. It's the agency that's more powerful.
Right.
When that happens, he ought to be kicked out by the people in New York.
It's amazing. It's amazing the guys who continue to get reelected. Like I said, Schumer is a caricature of himself. He's a
nothing.
He's a smarmy.
He's nothing.
He is. He's a non-entity. And yet
I served with him in the House. He's an empty shirt. I served with him in the House. And one of my staffers, who they also tried to harass, they were trying to find something and I did wrong. You know, and my staffer's lawyer told my former staffer, that Chuck Schumer was involved in working to get me out of office. Because I was, you know, I'm a troublemaker. I was a troublemaker. I'm not afraid of that. I'm not ashamed of it.
And you have to accept
I did my job.
When you come in and you kick over all the dishes, you have to accept that there will be blowback. Most guys can't handle that.
Imagine now with Afghanistan. You know, my brothers all served in every branch of the military. I tried to go to the Air Force Academy. I got the nomination in high school, but my bad eyes. I don't have eyesight in this one eye. So they wouldn't give me a waiver. So I devoted my life to the fire service. So I was in, I used to take delegations over to meet the troops all the time. I was in Iraq on a trip, and one of the young people from King of Prussia had been killed that I nominated. So on the trip over to Iraq, while the fighting was still going on, we went and got the briefing in Baghdad. And Paul Bremer was there, the head of the forces there, and General Sanchez. And they said, Congressman, do you want to go up to where the fighting is? I said, sure, we want to take our members up to meet the troops. So they put us in Black Hawk helicopters, made us wear flak jackets and helmets, and we flew up to the northern part of Iraq. And as we were coming down the land, we could see all the soldiers coming around from the U.S. and the Allied forces, because, you know, somebody's coming here. The general in charge, when we got on the ground, was a guy named Ray Odierno. Back then, he was a 1-star. He became a 4-star.
I worked for him as a 4-star.
Great guy.
Yeah.
So Ray Odierno comes over to the helicopter, welcomes me, says, Mr. Chairman, I can't tell you how happy we are that you're here. You made these young leaders ecstatic that it shows you care about them. I said, General, that's why we're here. I said, we're here on behalf of their constituents to let them know we care about them. So they gathered the members from the states where the soldiers are from. So you got to interact with your state delegation. So he starts telling the story about how proud he is of his troops. It was the 4th Infantry Division. He said, I can't tell you how proud I am of these men and women. He said, they're doing a great job here. They're interacting with the families in Iraq. They're helping the communities. They're being sensitive. They're taking care of the bad people. They're getting them out. I said, but General, you've had some casualties. He said, yeah, I've had some casualties. He said, I've lost some great leaders. He said, people that would have gone back to America and would have become presidents of colleges or teachers or doctors. He said, they died. I said, tell me about some losses. So he tells me a story. Tells me the story about a young lieutenant who was leading his group on a road they called the Killing Road between Tikrit and one other city. He said they came under heavy fire from the enemy. They were protecting civilians. And the leader of the group, the lieutenant, got shot and he went down. He got back up again and kept inspiring his troops to continue to protect the civilians there in Iraq, in this killing area. Then they shot him again, and he collapsed and he died. He was so the soldiers eventually won that battle, but they lost their leader. They all gathered around the leader's body, and they were very emotional because the second lieutenant was very well liked, West Point grad, and some of them were crying, and they carried his body back to the base camp. I said, General, I knew who that leader was. What do you mean you know who that leader was? I said, it was David Bernstein. He said, Congressman, how could you know that was David Bernstein? I didn't tell you the name. I said, you told me the details. You told me he's from Pennsylvania. I said, I just went through the death and the funeral with David Bernstein's family, and I nominated him to West Point.
Wow.
And I said, General, I'm carrying a letter in my back pocket from David Bernstein's parents. They gave it to me knowing I was coming over here in case I would meet anyone that had interacted with their son. This is a true story. I have pictures of me handing the letter to General Odierno. And I have a picture of General Odierno reading the letter in the middle of the battlefield. And the general gets all emotional. You can see the tears coming down. This is a 6'4" you know what Odierno's like, big guy.
I know the guy. He's a monster.
In the middle of the battlefield, commanding the 4th Infantry Division, getting emotional because he's reading a letter from Bernstein's parents from King of Prussia about their son and how proud they were, who had been killed several weeks earlier under his command. You know why? Because General Odierno's son had been shot in Baghdad. He lived, but he had been a classmate of Bernstein's at West Point. The point is, I felt my job was not to have any family go through that situation. And the problem is I can't stand it if there are intelligence people who think we have acceptable casualties. That's what they call it, acceptable casualties. There are no acceptable casualties, never. And that gets back to Afghanistan. So I get information that bin Laden is not in Afghanistan. We sent thousands of troops to Afghanistan, Americans' best. 2,500 of them die and come home in body bags. Thousands more come back injured, wounded. Their parents grieve them. We raised all this money to put them in homes and honor them. The honor should have been to not have it happen in the first place. And I find out.
Afghanistan and Iraq. You can argue our presence in Iraq all day long, and I think it's legitimate to say that did become a war of policy, not a war of necessity. Afghanistan, we did not have to take over. We had no business trying to nation build in Afghanistan. We had one mission: find the pieces of shit who did what they did on 9/11 and kill them and go home. None of this stuff of establishing forward fire bases and holding territory and all that.
We were
crap.
told as a nation and members of Congress by George Bush Jr., who I've lost respect for. We were told we're going to Afghanistan to get bin Laden.
Right.
And I, as the vice chairman of the Defense Committee, get 10 silver bullets, 10, not one. The bin Laden's not in Afghanistan.
He was in Pakistan and Iran.
He was in Iran. He was in Baluchistan.
Yeah.
And that information came from Democrats like Jack Murtha and Ron Klink, and it came from the royal families of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and it came from agency people who worked for our government who knew where he was.
Now, how did he get from there to Jalalabad? Because
What
he
happened-
seemed to have been in Jalalabad
what
for
happened-
a long time.
Well, two things I want to tell you. First of all, when Bush decided to send our troops initially into Afghanistan, I was under the impression, like you were, that that's where bin Laden was and we have to go there.
Yes.
See what I did? On my own, I took 2 other members of Congress, and Al Santoli, who was a decorated Vietnam veteran working intelligence, not with the support of our agency, on our own, we went to Rome because the king of Afghanistan, Zahir Shah, was living there in exile with his son. And I wanted to meet with him to convince him to go back to Afghanistan and convene a meeting of all the tribal leaders so that when our troops went in, they wouldn't do to them what they did to the Russian military.
Right.
So we met with Zahir. I have the pictures of me meeting with Zahir Shah in his home in Rome. He went back to Afghanistan. He convened what's called a Loya Jorga, all the tribal leaders, and he convinced them to accept America's troops. I did that to protect our troops.
Was he
Then
the
I
one that
find
got
it.
assassinated?
I'm
There was
sorry?
a tribal leader who worked with us. He was a key figure in helping us, and he got assassinated.
Yeah, a number of them.
Yep.
did.
Yeah.
So then I get this information that bin Laden is not in Afghanistan, he's in Iran. So the bottom line is, I verify this. George Stephanopoulos was asked by one of my sources, who was working with the Iranian ministry up at the UN, hey, when President Ahmadinejad from Iran had come to speak at the UN, and he said, President Ahmadinejad, there are people in our crazy country that are saying that you're harboring bin Laden. Why, and it made it like a joke, just to Stephanopoulos. And Ahmadinejad said, no way would we ever harbor bin Laden in our country. But he went back to Tehran. And that's when they found out that he was in their country. The government of Iran did not put bin Laden in Iran. Do you know who put bin Laden in Iran?
No.
Who did we kill? Who did Donald Trump take credit for killing 5 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Soleimani.
Yeah.
Soleimani was the head of the IRG.
Right.
The IRG is the intelligence arm that had worked with our intelligence leaders before Iran went off the deep end.
Right.
So the deal wasn't cut with the Iranian government. They knew nothing about it. The deal was cut with Soleimani,
Soleimani personally.
representing Iranian intelligence. People don't understand. People don't think clearly. When Iran was under the Shah, they were a close ally.
Right.
And that's
We
what
had, we had their guys training with us in Chicago.
Absolutely. Well, think about it for a moment. During that time, our intelligence leaders trained all the Iranian intelligence leaders.
Right.
When the radical Ayatollahs threw off and changed the government, they didn't change their intelligence. They stayed the same.
Right.
So their loyalty was still to our intelligence. You understand?
So Soleimani probably knew our guys. At the end.
Absolutely. 100%.
So at some point, bin Laden did leave Iran. I don't know when.
That's when Ahmadinejad, when he found out that Soleimani had cut the deal, they kicked him out of Tehran over to Pakistan. That's when it happened.
Yeah. Wow.
That's when it happened. Well, the other thing I would say to you is, and I have to say this over and over again, I am not an opponent of the intelligence agency.
Right.
And there are good people that devote their lives to our agencies. And I don't want to make it sound like that everybody that works for the CIA
No,
or
no,
the
absolutely. I mean, the
they're
rank
great
and
people,
file, the
heroes.
rank and file, the FBI, the
They're
rank and
great
file,
people.
the CIA are good people.
My partners, one of my partners today is
It's
Buck
the
Revelle.
It's the career bureaucrat snakes at the top of these organizations that have wrecked them.
Buck Revelle was the deputy director of the FBI in the 90s. He's one of my partners today. My office in DC is with 3 federal judges, including Judge Sullivan, who was oversight judge for the Department of Defense. So there are good people in these agencies, but there are some real scumbags. And that's what Trump's trying to sort out now. And I hope the American people stay with him long enough for him to do that.
It's going to be a tough 2 years. I try to warn people that if Trump succeeds at his agenda, there is going to be pain involved. There are going to be growing pains and all this. We cannot, with the first breeze, jump ship. Getting the commerce and economics recovered is going to be an adjustment. Getting rid of the scum at the top of the bureaucracies is going to be an adjustment. There's going to be inconveniences, but if we can get through this 4 years, but especially the first 2 of the 4, then the talk of the golden age returning is true. It'll be true.
I agree 100%.
If we break and run, it won't.
I believe this all started under the Clintons. I was very aggressive in the 90s, and I saw some things happen there that blew my mind. I mean, what really bugs me with Hillary Clinton is that she was behind this whole thing of making it appear as though Donald Trump was tied in with Russia.
Yeah.
I can provide for you on a future show the Time magazine cover from July of 1996, which Time magazine did a big feature in that publication that year. Her husband was president. Do you know what the subject of that front page story is?
What was that?
It's a picture of Boris Yeltsin, the whole cover. And the headline is, read all about the secret plan of Clinton and the U.S. to reelect Boris Yeltsin. We reelected Boris Yeltsin president.
Yeah,
We did. The Clintons were involved in
everything.
reelecting Yeltsin because we were siphoning money out of Russia.
Right.
So he was our guy. So here's Hillary blaming Trump for being manipulated by the Russians when her and her husband were making money off of keeping Yeltsin in power.
And they would go on to make tens of millions from Putin.
Absolutely. He got $500,000 from one speech for the mayor of Moscow, Luskov's wife.
That nobody enjoyed.
Yeah, and she cut the nuclear deal to give Russia control over nuclear material.
You took
Well,
the words
she
right out of my
said
mouth. Yeah.
I mean, people don't understand history. And again, I am not for one party or the other. I just think people need to understand what's going on here.
Right. Problems don't come from parties.
No.
Parties can create problems, but the real problems come from individuals, from
Follow the money.
personal corruption. The idea of blaming Trump for being in bed with Russia and making up all these charges. Anytime Bill or Hillary Clinton point at you and charge you with something, they're doing it because they have done it.
Exactly right.
Hillary and Obama were perfectly proud of themselves. Here's Obama's own words. We will do what it takes to defeat Netanyahu overtly and covertly, and we are doing that right now in Israel. They were interfering with Israel's elections and saying it on TV. But when you don't have anything to charge somebody with, look at your list of bullshit and charge people with that and just say they did it,
Yeah, it's a sad in the 90s when China was first, we realized they were getting our technology, and that's when it started. The Congress was so angry that the Congress passed a law creating what's roughly called the Cox Commission. It was called the Cox Commission because Chris Cox from California chaired it.
Right.
Cox Commission had 9 members, 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats. They were all committee leaders except me, and I was one of the 9 members. So our job was to meet behind closed doors with the agencies, no public hearings, and get information about how did China get our technology? Was it serious? And what should we do about it? So we met for 6 months behind closed doors. The final vote was 9-0. No dissension. Our security was severely harmed. The report, there were 3 reports that came out, and Chris Cox, good guy, Republican. I said, Chris, we're coming out, saying our security was, but you're not telling why it was harmed and how it was harmed. He said, Kurt, I can't include that in the report. I said, why? He said, because the Democrats won't support the report. I want the report to be unanimous. What I have, and I'm going to show these eventually, I have the only charts that show the linkages. I had my friends in Intel do charts that show that in the mid-1990s, China set up an organization as a part of their PLA, People's Liberation Army, to establish front companies, about 1,000 of them. And these front companies were all over the world. They were funded, and their goal and objective was to get access to U.S. Technology. Some of them were through universities like Stanford.
Right.
They had direct ties to Stanford and other installations in the U.S. They also got access to our White House. You might remember the names James Wong and James Riotti.
Yep.
There are 4 of them that got access into the Clinton White House 60 times in 1 year. They weren't U.S. citizens. They were raising funds for the Clinton-Gore campaign and for the Democratic National Party.
All right. Correct me if I'm wrong on my history here. They nailed Clinton dead to rights, taking money.
Absolutely.
And then they said, when the election is over, if we have any money left, we'll give it back. And gosh, and begarly, they just didn't have any money left, and the Chinese didn't get any money back. Bought, paid for, caught red-handed, and still with the reward.
They got all this technology through campaign donations. These Chinese nationals got access to the White House. And all this, by the way, is public information. I'm not giving away any classified information here. It was terrible. I mean, I told the story on one of their podcasts where the L'Oreal Corporation, at the time headed by Bernie Schwartz, got caught transferring stage separation technology. Stage separation technology is important to have a multi-stage missile.
Correct.
You can't hit the U.S. from China unless you have a multi-stage capability, and they didn't have it.
Is this the L'Oreal case? Is this
L'Oreal Corporation gave them that technology. So their CEO was under investigation,
Right.
Bernie Schwartz. And they were looking at doing indictments. So you know what happened? Clinton's security advisor, Sandy Berger, arranged a retroactive presidential waiver. Retroactive presidential waiver. So the technology was already transferred. Now Berger arranged a retroactive presidential waiver approving it.
Is that like pardon a guy who hasn't been charged with anything? Is that
Absolutely,
the
exactly.
same idea?
Only this is the country that today we're worried about.
Right.
To give them, and then Bernie Schwartz becomes the single biggest donor to the Democrat Party. I put it in the congressional record. It's all in the congressional record.
Yeah.
And then Sandy Berger gets caught stealing documents out of the archives. Remember?
Yep. And his
Stuffed them in his underwear and socks.
Yep.
Those documents were all pre-9/11 intelligence documents. He didn't want them to go to the 9/11 Commission, or they'd have to respond to them. So he stole them. He lied about it. Finally, the Justice Department called him in, and he hired one of Clinton's lawyers, and they cut a plea bargain. The same lawyer that sent the agents to my daughter's house is the guy that cut the plea bargain for Sandy Berger.
Yeah.
The same lawyer. And that lawyer cut the plea bargain. He pled guilty to 11 felonies, stealing 5 documents, destroying 5 documents, and lying to a federal agent. You know what his penalty was? 1 misdemeanor. No jail time.
Unbelievable.
1 misdemeanor. These are classified documents since he destroyed them. When Sandy Berger leaves the government, after Clinton leaves, he sets up a company. The name of that company was Stonebridge. He brings in Madeleine Albright, who becomes a partner in Stonebridge. It's called Stonebridge Albright. Berger dies. The company today is called, and guess what Stonebridge does? and represent all Chinese corporations.
Unbelievable.
Please tell a friend about the Free Zone Communique. We live and die with the share and subscribe buttons. Please use affiliate and sponsor buttons to support our work. Thank you very much for joining us today.